Welcome to part 7 of the time tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about wiring the gears together so when you rotate one gear, the rest of the gears will rotate correctly. And we'll also probably create a particle system for sparks. So let's go ahead and file save as. We'll save this as time5.blend. Save blender file. The first thing that I want to do is change the direction that the pocket watch is facing. So if I go to view right now and choose, let's say, left, you can see that the pocket watch is facing up. I need it to face forward because if I create a particle system right now, it would fall behind the pocket watch and not down. So let's go ahead and hit A on the keyboard to select all. Otherwise, you have to come down here and click select all. And there's a couple ways to do this. First of all, we do need to set the 3D rotation to 0, 0, 0 to be in the center of the world. And we're going to come down here and change this to 3D cursor. Okay, so we're going to pivot off the 3D cursor right now. Now you might think that you can come up here and just rotate this, but nope, that's only going to do one object at a time. All right, so I'm going to set that back to 0. Now shortcut keys are on the keyboard, then X, so it's going to be rotate, X on the X axis. Then I'm going to hold down Control so it snaps every 5 degrees. So I'm going to go all the way to 90. There we go. So now you can see here it says 90. And the pocket watch is facing the correct direction. However, if you don't have shortcut keys, I'm going to undo that. What you could do is come down here to the rotate tool, click and drag it a little bit. Then over here is the properties for the last tool used. Set this value to 90. Okay. And you can see here, it says 90 up here. So this allows you to do everything that's selected. All right, cool beans. Now let's go ahead and switch this back to active element, or sorry, let's do individual origins. And we don't need to have everything selected anymore, so I'm going to hit A. I'm going to go File, Save. The next thing we need to do is hide everything to get to the gears. So select the pieces, H on the keyboard, or you have to come down to Object, Show Hide, and Hide right here. So let's go ahead and hide everything that's not a gear. I'm not going to hide exactly everything, just the components that could possibly get in my way while working. Okay, for the smaller pieces, I'm going to use the C select, which is circle select here, C on the keyboard. Middle mouse button will allow you to increase or decrease the brush size, or the selection area, I should say. Right click will deactivate the tool, same thing with enter and escape on the keyboard, and then hide, H on the keyboard. So same thing over here. Right click, H. Okay, so that should do it. All right, so before I go any further, we need to make sure, go to File, User Preferences, and under File, that Auto Run Python Scripts is checked. Okay, this needs to be checked. If your system isn't working, it's probably because this is not checked, all right? So let me close that. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is set the gears to being 0 on all rotation values. So right now it's got a 90 applied to all of them. In fact, these in here are actually kind of skewed, so I need to change that. And I also want to make sure that we're going to set in stone all the rotation values. And I'll explain that here in a sec. First of all, let's reset these to 90. And I might as well set the Z-axis to 0 as well. Otherwise, we would have had some wobbling gears. Yours may or may not have had this issue. I'm just showing you that you want to make sure that your X-axis on all your gears is 90. And your Z-axis needs to be 0, and your Y-axis can be a different number because some of these we rotated to fit in the position. Some should be 0, some were rotated, okay? But again, like I said, we need to set in stone all these values to 0, so keep them in place when we do this. So I'm going to go ahead and select, let's say, this gear, and you can come down to Object, Apply, Rotation. And you'll see here it sets the X, Y, and Z rotation all to 0 and keeps the object where it was. So we need to do this to everything. So I'm going to click on an object, hold down Shift, and select all the other objects. Come up here, same thing. And come down to Object, Apply, which is also Control A on the keyboard, Rotation. So now all the objects should have 0 rotation applied. Okay, so there's many ways to link gears together or sprockets together in Blender. One of them is using the Constraint tab and going to transform. However, I find this has issues when the animation rotation exceeds 360 degrees. You'll see a snap in the gears, and I don't want that. So we're going to actually try to wire these together, a lot like 3D Studio Max's wiring system. Okay, so to begin with, you need to pick a gear that's going to be your primary gear. So I'm going to make this big one my primary gear. This is the one that I will animate, and the other ones will follow. So I'm going to select this gear and start with it. So I'm going to come over to rotation and figure out which rotation I need to play with. And I think it's the y-axis. It is. Okay, so I'm looking for the rotation that causes it to rotate correctly. Set that back down to 0. I'm going to right click on it and say add single driver. So I'm adding a driver just to the Y. Okay, let's open up this window. I'm actually going to hit T on the keyboard to hide the tool panel. And in this side, I'll leave the properties panel open. And over here, we're going to change the view to, let's see here, we want graph editor. Okay, now we're going to change the graph editor to drivers. And we're going to select the driver. And then we're going to open up the properties panel, which is the plus sign here, or N on the keyboard. And you can see here, it's already applied a variable. Now, if you don't see a variable, just click add variable and it will pop in. So the first thing you want to make sure is under type, it's scripted expression, all right? So this is very important. And then right here where it says var, we're going to give it a name. So you can give it any name you want. I'm going to just say RS for rotation sprocket, I guess. I don't know, I'm just making it up. I'm going to Control C this and Control V it in here because these two need to share the exact same name. However, up here I can add values like negatives or times or math equations. But the name has to be in both locations. So it's going to ask me what kind of transform channel I want to do. I want to do single property. And I want to choose which object it's going to follow. So I'm going to click the eyedropper and click on gear 16001. So that's the big one. And just to make sure, select it. And actually it says right here, 16001. Okay. So with this gear selected, I know it's following 16001, but now I need to tell it what to follow. All right. So we know we're using the Y elure rotation. So I'm going to come in here and type in rotation underscore elure dot Z. Okay. Now, if I wrote this wrong, you would see that it would still be red. So let's say I actually accidentally typed in rotation, so R-A-T. And you can see here it indicates that it's red, saying that this is incorrect. So I'm going to switch it back to rotation. And we should be good. So I'm going to select this gear. And under the Y-axis, I'm going to rotate it. And you can see nothing is happening. Okay, let's check why. Go back to this object. Oh, that's right, because I put in the wrong axis. We need to rotate off the Y-axis. So I'm going to come in here, delete this, type in Y, come back to this gear, and now rotate, and you can see it's rotating, but it's not rotating the right direction or at the right speed, all right? And this is where setting these gears at the appropriate radius and naming them so we know which radius is what is really going to become helpful. So we know this is 16 of radius because we call it G16, and this one is G8, so half the size. So we're going to come in here where it says expression, and we're going to give it a negative value, which means it's going to rotate in the opposite direction. And we're going to times it by 2 because it needs to rotate twice as fast. All right. So I'm going to hit enter. And again, I have this gear selected. Go back to this one and rotate. Now you can see it's not only rotating the correct speed, but also in the correct direction. And there's your first wiring in Blender. And like I said, I've never ran into issues with exceeding 360 degrees and getting a pop animation. It should work without a problem. Okay. So moving forward, I can choose to wire this gear to this one or the main gear as well. It's up to you. Let's go ahead and try wiring it to this one. So with it selected, I'm going to go into the Y-axis, right click, add single driver, click on the Y elure rotation. And just like before, I'm going to say RS for the name, put RS here as well. And I'm going to select which object. So I will do the object G8. And I'm going to say location, actually, sorry, transform to single property. and we're going to give it a value. So in this case, it's going to be again rotation underscore Euler, EULER, and dot Y. So now that's going to follow the rotation. However, it needs to go in the opposite direction, but it will rotate at the same speed as this one because of the same size. So now if I click this guy and rotate it, voila. Pretty cool. So let me set this back down to 0. Go to the next one. Repeat the process. Add single driver. Oops. In this one, I'll follow the main gear as well. That's fine. Make sure I set it to single property. Rotation underscore Euler dot Y. I'm going to copy this. And let's just, it needs to be times 2. Because it's twice as fast as the big gear. And let's select this one and rotate. All right, I think I like that. So let's set this to 0 and go to this one. And I'll also have this one follow the big gear. I'm going to go ahead and set this to single property, RS, choose the object, paste in that value that I keep typing in. And in this case, I do want it to go, twice as fast and negative rotation. And let's go ahead and select this and rotate it. Looking good. Let's go ahead and continue. Let's grab this guy. First of all, let's set this back down to 0. And make sure everything's rotating good. Okay, so I'm going to have this guy follow this gear back here. So again, apply a single driver. Choose the object it's going to follow, the G8. And single property. Let's just give it a name. And it's going to be the same equation, rotation Euler Y. This one is a G2, so it needs to be, I think, 4 times faster than the G8. So let's go ahead and here, times 4, and I think I want it to rotate in the opposite direction. All right, so let's set that up. Let's go ahead and come over here, select this, and there we go. It's rotating at the right speed. All right, so let's set this to 0. So repeating the process, assign single driver, click on it. Now this is going to be a little more tricky because sometimes when you try to select with the eye stopper or the eyedrop tool, it'll grab objects that are in the background. So I'm going to rotate here. That way I know it's grabbing the G2 here. Good. Single property, paste the code, give it a name, RS, and because it's following its companion, it just needs a negative value, and we should be good. So let's test it one more time, and voila. Okay, so let's just go through and do these real quick without testing. Add single driver, single property, choose the companion, RS with a negative, paste code, and repeat. Let's see, add single driver. Oops. And yep, see how it's going to fight me trying to select this G2. Yep, so I'm going to deactivate it, rotate it around. I could try to find the object through the list here, but that could take forever. So let's just do that. There we go. Okay, so paste the code and we're good to go. Come back to here and voila, all my gears are working correctly. Okay, so let's jump up to here and repeat, but this time I'm going to actually have it move twice as slow. And the reason is because maybe these gears are controlling a different factor of the pocket watch, so they're not moving in the same exact sync as these. So let's go to here, and again I want them to be controlled by the same gear just because it saves me time in animation. All right, RS. And I'm going to give this one a negative RS. And I'm going to go divided by 4. So it's going to be 4 times slower. Let's go ahead and select the object, single property, paste the code. All right, so we should be good to go. Let's test it. And you can see here now it moves slower, which is exactly what I wanted. Of course, you can type any value you want in there. All right, so let's keep rocking and rolling. So I think I'll have this one being controlled by this one. Oops. And let's just make sure that's working correctly. Actually, I need to add some math in here. So this is going to rotate, it's a G4, I think. G4, yep. And this is a G8, so it's going to be half as fast, or twice as fast. There we go. So I'm going to times this by 2. Come over here, rotate. All right, we're looking good. And just repeating everything we've already done. See, it's going to be negative RS. It's going to follow this guy. It's going to be a single property, paste. And it's going to be twice as fast. Okay, so now if I go back to this, rotate, voila. Pretty cool. Let's go ahead and set this back down to 0. All right, so that sets the animation property or the wiring property for the gears. Let's go ahead and I think we can unhide everything and then go into playing with particles to create a spark effect. So let's save this first. Let's close the graph window right here. I'm going to grab this corner here, drag it over, and it goes away. I'm going to come down to Google Chrome and look up reference images for sparks. Just a side note, in the Blender renderer, we're not going to be able to create realistic looking sparks, and that's because we cannot control the depth over time of each particle system, and we're not going to be able to control the color over time on the particle system. Now in Cycles Render we can, but in the Blender renderer we can't, so just keep that in mind. But we will create something that looks like sparks and looks cool, because we're going to stick with the Blender renderer for now. So the first thing I need is an object to emit the particles from. I'm going to use a plane. Of course, I can come down to Add Mesh Plane, or I can just hit Shift-A, Mesh Plane. Now I'm going to go down to the Move tool, and I'm going to move it out from behind the objects here, or you can hit G and X on the keyboard for grab and move on the X-axis. And I'm going to hit period on the numeric keypad to frame it, or you can go View selected by numeric pad period. Okay. So with the object selected, all you need to do is go to this tab right here, which is the particle tab, and hit new. And if I hit the play button down here, you can see particles are being generated. So it was very simple to create them. Now let's start playing with them. First, I want to set the timeline to, let's say, 50 frames, and that way I can see my changes happen quickly as it cycles through the animation. I'm going to come over to my properties panel for the object, and I think I'm going to rotate it negative 101. That's good. And the reason is because I want it to come out of an area right here, so I want to shoot them in this direction. All right. So let me go ahead and close the properties window now. All right, so in the particle parameters, the first tab here, emissions, you can set the number of particles being generated. So it's set to 1,000 right now. You can set this to any value you want, but I'm going to send it to 200 just for the sake of this start of the tutorial. So that way the computer doesn't crash or slow down while I'm recording it. Later on, I'll bring this up for the final render, but for right now, this looks good. Or this will work, I should say. Now this next step is to pick a start time. I'm going to leave it at 1 for now, but later this will change, and an end time. Now I want this particle system to look like two wires hitting each other to create that type of quick spark effect. So I'm going to say end time of 3. So that way there's technically 2 frames, but 1 through 3, so 3 frames generating particles. All right, so it's very quick. Now the lifespan is how long the particles live. Right now it's set to 50 frames. I'm going to set this to 15 because sparks don't last very long before they die. Now random will randomize the lifespan of each particle system, or particle itself. So if I set this to 1, that means the various different particles will die at various different frame rates. So it won't go beyond 15, but it could do anywhere between 0 and 15. I'm actually going to set this to 0.95 because I don't want any particles really dying at frame 0. All right, so emit from, I can choose the vertices. We already had the faces activated. And volume, there is no volume with the plane, so there's no point in clicking on that tab. You have different ways it's being generated from the surface, so jittered, random, and grid. Random and jittered are very close to each other, except for jitter, I can actually play with a few settings. So I'm going to leave it on jitter for right now. I am going to check use modifier stack, and that's just in case I apply modifiers to this object, it will understand that those modifiers are there and act accordingly. Now the next tab down is cache. I can cache the particle system into a file on the hard drive so they play back more efficiently and not being buffered into the RAM, because right now you can see this red bar down here, the particles are being buffered into RAM, which eat up resources. So later on I would probably cache this, but not right now because I still want to make changes. Let me go ahead and hide the missions tab for now. Velocity. So this is how fast the particles are being generated and in which direction. So right now you can see that the particles have a number 1 value in normal. Now normal is the direction of the face of the polygon. All right, so it's pointing this way, so they're being generated this way. But you also see that they're falling. And that's because in Blender, it automatically activated a gravity to the scene. So if I come over to this right here, you can see here in gravity, there's 9.8 meters per second squared. I think the meters per second squared is being added because it understands it's the gravity section. So you can change this value, the gravity, to any axis, X, Y, and Z. I'm going to leave it on Z, and in fact, I'm not even going to play with this. Some people tell you if you don't want gravity, turn it off here. I disagree. I say turn it off within the particle system itself, not within this area. So let's go ahead and jump back to the particle tab. So right now it's being generated in the normal direction of 1. Of course, you can choose X, Y, or Z, or mix these. Tangent kind of bends the particles in a specific direction, and of course you can rotate the direction. But I want to focus on just the normal because I want the plane to dictate the direction. So I'm going to set this to, let's say, 20. So increasing the number not only chooses the direction, so the normal is the direction, the number is how fast they're going. So you can see 20 is now just jumping right off. The gravity is still there because you can see they're starting to fall, but they're accelerating quickly off the surface of the plane. Random, let me rotate this around. Sorry about that, I started to cough real bad. All right, so the random section allows me, when I dial this up, to spread out the particles so they're not all heading in one direction. Let me just type in, let's say 6. And you can see here that the particles are now spreading out more, which makes it look more interesting. And of course, you can keep dialing this number up. So I'm going to minimize the velocity tab for now. I don't need rotation because I don't want to rotate the individual particles, but that's what you can do here. Physics, this deals with how the particles are being calculated in the scene. We're set to Newtonian. That's fine, but you can also choose these other options. If I was trying to create a fluid-like sim, I would use fluid. But I don't think there's anything in here I really need to change, because I'm going to use the material to control the size, not this stuff. So let me go ahead and close that. Render, this is where we can change the look of the particles. So for right now, just for the sake of it, I'm going to click on line. And you can see here that generates these lines. And I'm going to set the tail to 0 and the head to, let's say, 0.5. And that kind of looks like sparks are flying off of this. Now I'm actually going to set it back to halo for rendering later on, because we're going to use motion blur to create the trails, but just wanted to show you this is how you can get a visual look in your viewport. And again, this deals with rendering, so it would render with lines right now. Is there anything else in this? No, not right now. Pretty much the two that we're going to play with is halo and line. Now for the emitter, I'm going to uncheck this because I don't want it visible when it renders. And actually for right now, I'm going to leave it on so it doesn't disappear on me, but in the final rendering, I'm going to uncheck it because I don't need it. I don't want it visible. So let me go ahead and minimize the render tab for right now. Display, how it displays in the viewport. I'm not going to play with this. I'm fine with that. Children, you can actually apply extra particle systems to each particle. I'm going to leave that alone for now. Field weights. This is where you can actually turn off gravity if you don't want gravity being applied to the particles. All right, I'm going to keep it on, but this is where you would adjust it, not this tab over here. So let me go ahead and minimize that. Force field settings, we are going to play with this to kind of break the particles up a little bit more. So I'm going to check self effect. And I'm going to go none. Let's go to turbulence. And you can see here they're starting to scatter a little bit more. So let's increase the noise. That's looking pretty good. Sparks are kind of chaotic. I mean, if you look at these these sample images, reference images, you can see sparks just kind of fly everywhere. And that's what I'm going for. I can increase the size a little bit, spread them out even more. I think I kind of like that. Okay, so you have some options in here. Flow, if you're going to use this, use it at very small increments, like let's say 0.1, because this will actually, see, it kind of makes it look like it's going in the opposite direction. It almost applies like a liquid effect, a running water effect to the particle system. But if I run too high, it's just going to create, like I said, shoot it off into nowhere. So if you use this, use it at smaller increments. I'm not going to use it at all, but just to give you that a heads up on that. All right, so that's looking good. Is there anything else I need to play with in here? Flows, speed, or sorry, seed. I don't really need to play with this. It's set at 103. If I set it to 1, it's going to give me kind of a different effect. It's, how do I explain this? It's like changing the start and end point, or start and end point for the effect. That's not a very good explanation. Think of it randomizing the effect. That's a better statement. It randomizes the effect. So if you don't quite like it, you can try playing with this to get various different looks for how the turbulence is being applied. And of course, you can dial up amount up here, and this is going to decrease, believe it or not, how much this is being applied. So I don't know why, but it does. And you can see if you don't have self checked on, this is not being applied at all. Let me dial this up just a little bit more. I think 10 is the most you can go. Let's bring up the size, see what that does. That's interesting, but not what I want. Let's go 5. Let's go 3. That's kind of cool. And I'll probably go back to velocity and bring this up to, let's say, 30. Sparks happen quickly. Maybe 25. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So now if I pause this, and let's go ahead and set the viewport to rendered. you can see it's rendering out these little lines because that's what I have it set to in rendering. Let's apply a material now. So go to the material options, go new, and we're going to choose halo. And that's going to create a glow effect for the particle system. So that's pretty cool. Is there anything in this that I want to have checked? Well, to be honest, there's a lot of things I want to change in here, but first I want to get rid of the lines. Let's switch this back to dots. So let's go back to the particle system and go into halo here. There we go. Now everything's dot, and I'm going to turn off emitter. So that way the emitter is not being displayed. So let's go back to the material section. And in here we're going to play with a few things. So size, I can dial up the size. Of course, we don't want it that big, but let's go, let's say 2. And the hardness, this is weird. The lower the number, the softer it is. The higher the number, the... wait, no, I think the higher the number, the softer it is. Yeah. And the lower the number, the harder it is, which this mind boggles me why it's set this way. So it's like hardness. The more I have hardness in, the softer it is. Yeah. It's just backwards what you'd normally think this would refer to. So lower the number, the harder. Higher the number, the softer. Okay. And what I really want to do is apply this option right here, lines. And it creates this star effect on each one. And of course, I can give it a color. All right. Now there's too much white bleeding through. So what I'm going to do is decrease the alpha here. And I'm actually going to set the color to a black because I don't want that extra glow going on. There we go. That's much better. You can still kind of see it's there, but it's less visible. And of course, I can decrease the value a little bit more to bring it down, but I'm losing also the brightness of the lines. I can add rings, creates these ring effects around it, which is pretty cool. I'm not going to use that. And then of course I have star tips, which you're not going to see too much here, but you can barely see it's creating these pyramid things. Let me turn off line, see if it's even more visible. There you go. So I'm going to turn that off. Just to give you a heads up, you can use that. Now you have options here. Soft is not really going to change much in our situation, but you have some control over vertex norms, extreme alpha, shading. I'm not going to play with any of that. Flare doesn't tend to work well with this as well, so I'm not going to apply that, and that's pretty much it. So you can play with how much alpha is being pushed through. I wish there was a way to kind of just focus on the alpha of the glow itself instead of having that going on, the extra little black, but there's not. So we got to work with what we have. I'm actually going to lighten this up a bit. Yeah, that looks better. Okay, so that's a start, and the size is probably a little too big, so I'm going to bring it down to, let's say, 1 for now, but later on I might need to adjust this. Okay, so let's come out of rendering mode to solid. All right, and with this object selected, I'm going to move it over and place it into my scene. Now I need to unhide everything to know exactly where this is going to go in my scene. But for right now, I'm just going to eyeball it because later on I can change it. So I'm going to hit the rewind button, hit play. So there's my sparks being generated. And maybe go to, let's say, about here. And let's see what it looks like. All right, so now you can see little sparks flying off, and it's going to look really cool when we apply motion blur. So we can't see motion blur in the viewport. We're going to have to create a camera and actually start playing with rendering. Let's do that. Let's switch this back to solid. And another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my scene environment here, right here. I'm going to change the horizon color to black. Later on, I'm actually going to turn off sky altogether. But for right now, I'm going to change this to black. So that way when I view this stuff, let's go back to the rendering tab, I get a black background instead of a gray. Go back to solid. And let's save our scene real quick before we do anything else. The first thing I need to do is add a camera. So add camera right here, or Shift A, camera right here. Now we can frame the camera to the view. So let's set up the view to something like this. And if I go down to view, align view, align active camera to view, you can see it jumps. Now don't worry if you don't see anything. That's because under the camera settings, we need to expand the clipping. So if I increase the end clipping, you can see now everything's visible. So if I just dial this up to, let's say 300, there we go. All right, so clipping kind of makes things invisible to the camera depending on its distance, and I have a start clip and an end clip. Let's see, that's set, viewport clipping, camera. All right, so I actually only want to frame the particle system. So let's go ahead and come out of this mode. I just hold down Alt and middle mouse button to rotate out of the mode. I'm going to zoom in here, and let's frame up these particles because that's what I really want to render. So again, Control Alt, new number pad 0 is a shortcut key for the frame. If I hit this plus sign here and I go down to display and turn on toggle quad view, it gives me a top, front, and right orthographic view. In these views, I can actually move the camera around to maybe frame what I'm trying to look at a little bit better. So let's go with that. All right, so I'm going to come out of toggle quad view. All right, and this is not really zooming in and out. The only thing that's actually going to render, like I said, is inside this box. So it's just kind of framing the box better in the window. All right, so with the camera created, we can actually set a render point, but because my computer's fairly slow, I need to hide a bunch of things from the renderer. Now, just because they're hidden in the viewport does not mean that they're hidden in the renderer. If you can see here, there's these eye icons, that's for the viewport, and these render icons, or these camera icons, that's for the renderer. So I need to uncheck anything that doesn't have an eye. In fact, actually, I'm just going to hide everything from the renderer because I don't even want to render the sprockets. All I want to render is the particles. So I can get this done effectively and efficiently. So I'm just going to hide everything. Okay, so the plane was the particle system here. Probably should rename this. Particles. All right, and you, of course, if you don't remember it, you can search, or can't find the plane, just click here and type in plane, or if you've already renamed it, typed in whatever you named it. All right, so I do want to make sure that's set to render. Okay, let's bring this back up. So I'm going to go to the rendering tab and click the render button. And you can see here it's rendering out the particle system. Now, I actually, during the rendering, I think I played with a few things, or during one of the breaks between the videos. Under the materials, I believe I played with some of these values. That's why I'm getting some white in here. I think this was black before. Sorry about that. So let me just switch it back to the way I had it. I think it was black and a little less alpha. I think this may have been a little bit more orange. So anyway, that's why my particles came out looking a little bit different than what I had as the texture. So let's jump back to the rendering again, click render, and there you have it. Okay. So with these in the shot, we need to add motion blur. That's why we added the camera. So right here where it says sample motion blur, I'm going to open this up and I'm going to turn it on. Now the shutter speed deals with how much motion blur is going to be applied to the moving objects, and then the motion samples is how many images are going to be rendered for the motion blur. So just to give you an example, let's bring this up to, let's say, 4. So it's going to give me 4 individual images, and it's going to combine it into one image for the actual blur. So now if I click render, it's going to render it out 4 times, and you can see here now I have 4 images stretching out the blur. And if I want it really smooth, I need to bring this number up even more. So let's bring it up to 10, render. And you can see it's creating a really cool effect, the line effect that we wanted. So let's bring it up even a little bit more. Let's say 15, because the whole idea is to try to smooth out as much as possible. In fact, in this case, I'd probably have to bring it up to like 20. Now just remember, you are increasing rendering times every time you do this because it's got to render out 20 individual images. So if I had everything else in the scene, it would be a nightmare because it's going to render out 20 individual images for each frame with all the gears and sprockets, so it'd take a long time. So that's looking good. That's looking really good. So like I said, the shutter is how much blur is going to be applied. So let's say I bring this up to 1 and click render. Let it go through. And you can see that they're stretched even further. Okay, so I'm going to bring it back to, let's say, 0.6, and samples, I will probably set it to 10 or 15, just for render time's sake. In fact, actually, I'm just going to uncheck this. Since I'm happy with the look, or I probably could test the look real quick before I do anything else. That's not looking too bad. Okay, so I think I'm going to work with that. I'm going to uncheck it for now just so I don't keep having to worry about this passing every time I render as I'm testing the look. I am going to jump over to the material real quick and reset this to maybe a little bit more white in the shot. Yeah, it's a little bit better. Brings a little more brightness to it. Okay, so moving forward, we have that done. I'm going to hit escape to come out of render mode, or you just come down here and click 3D mode. All right, so we've played with the particles. I think that's pretty much it. So you basically duplicate this object, so the particle emitter that we have, and you'd position it in various different areas. And if you want long sprouting particles, you would increase the, if I go to the particle system, you'd increase under emissions, how long it goes, so start and end time. And of course you can set a start time, let's say at 60 and an end time at 63 to have a short burst, or 60 and 200 and have a long burst of sparks. So I think that's pretty much it for this tutorial. What we're going to do is jump into part, I think, 8. And I'm actually going to go through setting up the animation and possibly setting up the whole scene for compositing and final render. We'll see how the animation goes. I definitely want to, while we're in this scene real quick, take the camera. So let me go into quad view and zoom out here, select my camera. Let me just, while watching this view, frame up my whole scene. And maybe something like that. And let me zoom out here, bring it up a little bit. I can even set the rotation values. Oops, that's location. Let's go 0 on the Y, 0 on the Z, and 90 on the X for right now. All right, just to frame everything in the shot for the next part of the tutorial. So I'm going to hold down Alt and come out of the camera mode. Anytime I want to go back into camera mode, I can hit, I think it's 0 on the keyboard. Otherwise, you have to come, when I'm out of the mode, you got to go to View, Camera, and Active Camera, just like that. So let me come out of quad view. I think we're ready for part 8, and we'll start animating things, and we'll probably unhide all this stuff and really create a nice look. So join me for part 8.